Good evening. My name is Father Andrew Downing, the Director of Ignatian Programs at Georgetown University, and as such, one of the organizers of Georgetown's annual program of events celebrating Jesuit Heritage Month, of which this evening's program is a part. I wish to welcome you here to Dahlgren Chapel of the Sacred Heart. This chapel is a physical symbol of the deep faith and spiritual sustenance at our nation's oldest Catholic university. In this sacred space, generations of students, faculty, staff, and alumni have encountered God in sacraments, in prayer, and in communal reflection. And in the spirit of our Jesuit and Catholic heritage, we profess here our deep respect and sincere appreciation for people of all backgrounds who seek to grow in faith as well as in knowledge. Georgetown's Jesuit tradition of education has always prized both the pursuit of truth and of virtue. It is the transformation of the whole person, from ignorance to understanding, from isolation to encounter, from indifference to moral responsibility, that characterizes the best of what a Jesuit education has to offer, the best of what we seek to offer here at Georgetown. And it is in keeping with that tradition that we gather here today to enter into dialogue with one another. So much of the discourse in our nation and in our world has hardened into rancorous noise. It's distracted us from our ability to have an informed, honest, even prophetic discussion about the ethical issues facing us today. With the Dahlgren Dialogues, we hope that a conversation in the midst of this sacred space might offer a more prayerful posture to engage political, academic, and spiritual leaders. Framing these dialogues within a place of prayer and worship, we hope, can sustain and empower us to be more active participants and to renew our common sense of purpose. This evening, the Office of Mission and Ministry, in collaboration with the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought, continues our series that seeks to deepen conversations around social justice in light of the rich theological heritage of our Christian faith. Here we share our thoughts, reflections, and prayers on the Gospel's call for us to be agents of reconciliation. As we engage in this evening's discussion, blessed are the peacemakers, Ukraine, the Middle East, Sudan, and a broken world. Now, it is our custom to begin and end the Dahlgren Dialogues with prayer. So I would now like to invite Georgetown student Shadi Makhlouf to come forward and to lead us in prayer. And I invite you all to please stand as you are able.
Let us pray. We are molded, each one of us, in the image of God. And within our souls, there's a fingerprint none can erase. We pray for those who have no regard for anyone but self, who put no value on human life, for nations and individuals who abuse and kill. We are not called to be judge or jury, but we are called to be agents of change. And if the butterfly that flaps its wings should be our attitude to others, then so be it, God. And may the hurricane this generates, somewhere within the world, reach into the hearts and souls of those for whom we pray, and reveal to them how precious are those for whom they have no love, and how precious are they who now bring tears to the eyes of God. Amen.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Kim Daniels, and I'm the director of the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life. And first, I'd like to thank you, Father Andy and Shadi, and welcome all of you here with us in person in Dahlgren Chapel, and also the more than 1,000 of you who are joining us online tonight for this important conversation. So Father Timothy Radcliffe, the great Dominican priest and soon-to-be cardinal who served as the lead spiritual advisor for the Catholic Church's Synod on Synodality recently, reflected on what he called this perilous and difficult moment in our world. And he said that in this moment, the Catholic Church has a very particular vocation to be a sign of Christ's peace and Christ's communion, and that means all sorts of steps which will not make headlines. Tonight we're taking that to heart by engaging in a dialogue among Catholics who live that call out, who take those simple but important steps that too often don't make headlines. We're asking how, in our current context, we can answer that core gospel call. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. We recognize that in a world fractured by terrible violence from Ukraine, the Middle East, Sudan, and other places, the pursuit of peace and justice seems more distant than ever. And throughout his pontificate, Pope Francis has decried this third world war fought piecemeal. Tonight, we hope to draw on the principles of Catholic social thought to explore what we can do to help respond to these crises and their immense human and moral costs. We approach this conversation from a place of humility. We're not going to offer detailed analyses on particular situations in one dialogue, but instead, we hope to add something distinctive to the larger conversation by hosting a dialogue among Catholics about Catholic social teaching and how it's threatened and also lived out in 3 particular places ravaged by violence and conflict. So tonight we've gathered scholars and grassroots voices to help illuminate the moral imperatives of peacemaking in these troubled times, to discuss Catholic teachings on war and peace and the use of force, and offer some possible pathways forward towards a more just and peaceful world. We have a wonderful group of respected leaders gathered here for our conversation tonight. Jordan Denari Duffner, Georgetown graduate, is an author, educator, and scholar of Muslim-Christian relations, interreligious dialogue, and Islamophobia. She is a member of the Catholic Advisory Council of Churches for Middle East Peace and co-authored a sign-on letter from U.S. Catholics on Israel-Palestine in 2024. Reverend David Hollenbach is the Pedro Rupe Distinguished Research Professor in the Walsh School of Foreign Service, a senior fellow at the Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and an affiliated professor in the Theology and Religious Studies Department here at Georgetown University. Sister Mumbi Kigutha is the president of Friends in Solidarity, the U.S. partner of Solidarity with South Sudan. She continues to minister as a reconciliation consultant for various local and international entities and speaks on several social justice issues. And joining us via Zoom is Tatiana Stavnichi, the president of Caritas Ukraine and the former director of the Subcommittee on Aid to the Church in Central and Eastern Europe at the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. So now let's get started. I'd like to start by asking all of you one opening question, and David, we'll start with you. How can Catholics and people of goodwill live out the biblical call to be peacemakers and to hunger and thirst for justice in a world broken by violence and deadly conflict?
Well, thank you very much, Kim, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you, both those of you here in the chapel and those of you who are online. The question you have asked, Kim, is a very powerful one, and the promotion of peace by the Church is a central part of its vocation. We can think of the term shalom as the commitment of the Church to the promotion of shalom or peace. But I also like to think of this term shalom, which we frequently translate as peace, as a term that could be best translated as wholeness, integrity. It includes both a commitment to nonviolence, but also a commitment to justice, because there can be no wholeness or reconciliation without justice. And this opens a question that's a very important one in the ongoing discussion of the Church's role in this area as we face it today, namely the tension that can sometimes arise between the promotion of nonviolence and the promotion of justice. These can sometimes be in tension with each other, or perhaps even conflict with each other. For example, Pope Francis has strongly stressed the commitment to nonviolence and has spoken in a way that says that perhaps this means that war is no longer acceptable from a Catholic point of view, which would be to move away from the long-standing just war tradition that's part of the Catholic tradition. For example, in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, Francis said this: "We can no longer think of war as a solution because its risks will probably always be greater than its supposed benefits. In view of this, it is very difficult nowadays to invoke the rational criteria elaborated in earlier centuries, speaking of the possibility of just war." That's an explicit quote from Pope Francis in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti, which calls into question the use of armed force. On the other hand, Pope Francis has also raised the question of the use of violent force, armed force, to defend the people of Ukraine. He was asked on one of his airplane trips returning home whether or not it would be legitimate to morally arm Ukraine to resist the aggression against it by Russia. And he said this: this is a political decision which can be moral. And he went on to say, to defend oneself is not only lawful, but also can be an expression of love of country. So we've got a tension within the Catholic tradition on the use of armed force, both a commitment to nonviolence, but also a strong commitment to justice that says defending people who are being oppressed can be legitimate. The U.S. Catholic bishops have echoed this when they have said that there should be a presupposition by the Church in favor of nonviolence, that we should seek to pursue justice nonviolently. But the U.S. bishops went on to say that if sustained attempts at nonviolent action fail to protect the innocent people, legitimate political authorities are permitted as a last resort to use limited force to protect the innocent. So that opens the door to the possibility of the use of armed force. So perhaps that sets the stage for our conversation.
Very much so. Thanks very much, David.
Good.
Mumbi, I'll turn to you now. How do you say Catholics and people of goodwill can live out the biblical call to peacemaking and to hunger and thirst for justice in these times?
I truly believe it starts with self. So in the words of Richard Rohr, pain that is not transformed is transmitted or transferred. And I believe one of the reasons for all the turmoil we are seeing in the world right now is a result of unreconciled self and even relationships on the micro level. When parts of ourselves are not dealt with, our less savory elements take dominance. When we look at any conflict in the world, we can probably point to one or two things that triggered it. But over time, and the reason we are having more protracted conflicts is because of other issues that start coming to play. Scarcity of resources, ethnic violence that is fueled by leaders. So then it becomes a multiplicity of issues resulting in conflict not being resolved. But we also have to keep the tenets of Catholic social teaching front and center as the lens of discernment as we go through life. Not holding on to one in particular, but looking at all of them and how they can be used to impact the people around us. As a precious blood sister, I prefer the word reconciliation to peace. And I look at reconciliation as having the 4 pillars of truth, mercy, justice, and peace, just like the Psalms talk about it. And I feel that in many parts of the world, we constantly demand peace and mercy of the people who are oppressed, but don't give enough time to truth-telling and justice. and not punitive kind of justice, but restorative kind of justice, because punitive justice just results in more heart being put out there into the world. So how does reconciliation look at? The first thing when we think of many conflicts, what we are getting as truth depends on whichever source of information we get it from. And many times the oppressed don't get a chance to tell their story. So do we listen to the truth, and not just the truth about what happened yesterday, but the why of why yesterday happened usually lies generations back. Then justice, how does justice look like? And not from us who might be the ones trying to bring about this work of reconciliation, but how does justice look like for those who are affected by the conflict? And in many situations, you find that there is not just one victim and one perpetrator, but that the roles keep interchanging over the course of time. So how does that look like? What is justice? And then mercy and peace can come, lasting peace. Because when we look at many conflicts, the attempts of peace that are brought around by humanitarian actors tend to be situations of negative peace. They only last as long as there is a more powerful force in ensuring that people don't fight with one another. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jordan, let's talk to you now. How can Catholics and people of goodwill live out the biblical call to be peacemakers, to hunger and thirst for justice in these troubled times?
Thank you, Kim. I think we need to hold on to the foundational principle of Catholic social teaching, which is that every human person has inherent dignity and a right to life that comes from the fact that we are all created in the image and likeness of God. And this is a value, obviously, that we hold as Catholics, but that's also shared by people of other faith traditions around the world. And when I look at the Middle East, when I look at Israel, Palestine, and now Lebanon, I see so many ways that Catholics and people of other faith traditions are already trying to be peacemakers and working for justice when it comes to this conflict. Together, people from different faiths are advocating for a ceasefire, an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza, something that Pope Francis has been calling for since week one of this conflict that started in October of last year. This concern about the inherent dignity of all persons is also why we call for the release of the hostages taken from Israel, as well as Palestinian political prisoners who are held by Israel. It's the reason why we call for humanitarian aid to be provided in Gaza. And why many are calling for the US to condition or halt its weapon shipments to Israel. And then in terms of the long-term issues in the Holy Land, it's why why advocates are calling for the equal rights for all people, Israeli and Palestinian. And again, this is a really foundational principle that I think we need to hold on to, and it needs to be our guiding light when we're addressing issues like Israel-Palestine or other conflicts around the world. I also think we need to hold on to this lesson that we know from the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is that we don't have to share the identity of someone in order to advocate on their behalf or to try to alleviate their suffering. I'm not Israeli, I'm not Palestinian, I'm a white woman from the Midwest, but I think our Catholic faith requires us to identify with those who are suffering and to stand in solidarity with them. At the same time, I can't forget that there are Palestinian Catholics, Palestinian Christians in the Middle East who are suffering. I go on Facebook almost every day and see pictures from the parish in Gaza. There's one Catholic parish in Gaza that's been sheltering about 500 people there. And every day on the Facebook account, they post photos of people attending Mass, of people saying the Rosary. And these people are folks like you and I, and we owe them our solidarity just as we owe solidarity to all those who are suffering in the Holy Land right now.
Tatiana, thank you so much for joining us, and for joining us especially at this late hour for you. Let me come to you and say, how can Catholics and people of goodwill live out this call to be peacemakers, live out this call to hunger and thirst for justice in these troubled times?
Yeah, let me pick up a little bit from some of the things my colleagues talked about. There was talk about peace and justice, and I want to talk about how both those terms are relational. They talk about relationality, and it's one of the ways that we are created in the image of God. We're created to be with one another. We're created for the encounter. We're created to be gift to one another. It's a way that we find that fullness in life. Yeah? And what war does, or what violence does, is it rips at that image of God. It rips at what it means to be human, because it's destroying relationship, it's destroying trust. And so obviously the way that you build peace and justice is that you restore that relationship, you restore that trust, you take actions that restore that sense of humanity between one another. And we see that every day in Ukraine. We see that in the work that we do in Ukraine, that moment of encounter, that moment of reaching out to somebody who's in need, and that restoration that happens not only in the person who's in need, but in us, the ones who are offering the assistance, that there's something powerful that happens that fulfills the inside of our souls, that makes us all more human when we act together, when we together we create peace, when together we act in justice to right a wrong, to right a moral wrong.
David, let me come to you now. Come back to you. So first of all, let me give a little bit more background about David. Your writing and teaching focuses on human rights, justice and peace, humanitarian crises, refugees, religion and public life. You collaborate with Jesuit Refugee Services on the human rights of displaced persons. You've conducted workshops for parliamentarians and church leaders in South Sudan on human rights in this newly independent country. So can you start us off with an overview, a more detailed overview of traditional Catholic social teaching on the use of military force, the requirements of peacemaking, and how this is sometimes used and misused in conflicts?
Well, thank you. I would suggest this, that when we think about the Church's role in advancing peace in our world, we should think of it as occurring on several different levels. One level is the level of states, which is also the level of diplomacy, where the Church, through its leadership, through the Pope, through the Catholic bishops, through Catholic lay people who are involved in government, try to advance both the promotion of justice, but promoting justice in ways that is nonviolent and peaceful. At that level of diplomacy, at that level of states, at the level of organizations at a very advanced high level of political engagement. And that's one area in which the Church ought to be promoting social justice and peace and reconciliation. There's a second level that could be called the middle level. This is the domain in which various non-governmental organizations operate. I think back to the days when South Sudan was not yet an independent country, but was seeking to be movement away from domination by the government in Khartoum, from what's now Sudan. And there was a significant initiative taking place there by all kinds of agencies, non-governmental agencies, both secular and religious. And the Church agencies like Catholic Relief Service or Caritas Internationalis. These are major organizations that are operative in various parts of the world, and they were very much operative in seeking to bring peace to southern Sudan before it became an independent country. And they lobbied for helping to bring southern Sudan into independence, and which is where it now is. There was finally, at the very grassroots level, the Church's pastoral life at the grassroots was working on a program that in southern Sudan was called the people-to-people peace process, bringing people together at the very grassroots so that there would no longer be a kind of tribal animosity between them or religious animosity between them at a people level. And this would be another level. So all three of those levels, it seems to me, are very important for the Church to work for both peace and justice. And I think that that's an area where we need to pursue in a number of other parts of the world besides the Sudanese situation. It could be seen in Gaza, it could be seen in Ukraine, it could be seen any number of other places.
Thank you. Let me ask you another question. When we talk about these situations of violence and conflict, we know that they create millions of refugees and that the lives, dignity, and rights of refugees have been at the center of your work. My question for you is, what are the responsibilities of us as a nation, as a church, individuals, in responding to mass displacement? And how does welcoming the refugee fit into the church's broader mission here?
Well, that's a very important question today, because today, as of September of this year, there were approximately 123 million forcibly displaced people in the world today. That's both refugees who have been forced across an international border, but also internally displaced people who are displaced within their own country. So there's a huge crisis facing displacement in the world today. And the question, when we talk about 123 million displaced people, we're not going to solve that by admitting them all to the United States. There have to be a number of other initiatives taken. Certainly peace building, because one of the biggest causes of displacement in the world today is war. And so working for overcoming the war that's displacing people, that's the cause of their displacement in the first place, is a very important contribution. But secondly, most of the displaced people in the world today, most of the refugees, are displaced to other poor countries. So the vast majority of refugees are not fleeing to Germany or the United States or places where there's a lot of resources, but they're fleeing to countries that are very poor, like the South Sudanese refugees that are displaced to Uganda, or the refugees from the Democratic Republic of Congo who are displaced to Kenya. So So one of the things that has come to the fore in what's come to be called the Global Compact on Refugees. This was a document drafted a few years ago about how to advance the international response to the displaced of our world. One of the things that it was stated there was, not only do we need to address the root causes of displacement, but we also need to come to the aid of those poor countries who are already welcoming most of the refugees in our world today. That means the United States is not going to solve the refugee problem by admitting 123 million more people to this country, but we can come to the aid of countries like Uganda, like Kenya, where there are so many, and coming to their assistance in other parts of the world is crucial. So that's another step that needs to be. And how I would put this is to say this: we have an obligation to come to the aid of those from other countries who are displaced when there is grave need and when we have the capability to do something about it.
So welcoming the refugee when we can, and helping those who are also welcoming refugees as well.
Exactly, and doing it when we're able to do so. A country like Lebanon is already hosting huge numbers of refugees from Syria. But as you know, Lebanon is in crisis. And Lebanon does not have the capacity or the capability to welcome more refugees. So we have to come to the aid of those countries that are welcoming those. And that would mean coming to the aid of other countries in the region and coming to the aid of Lebanon to help them deal with the crisis.
And doing our part. Thank you very much. Mumbi, let me turn to you now. Through your work at Friends in Solidarity, you're committed to raising awareness for the situation in South Sudan and working in collaboration with the Catholic Church in Africa. How do you work to build a just and peaceful society on these values you've already talked about, inclusivity, collaboration, and solidarity, working between peoples, between cultures, between generations and natures? Can you talk a little bit about that work and the current situation in South Sudan?
Sure. And I would be remiss if I didn't use this chance to just highlight that from April 15th, 2023, Sudan has been at war. It's a war that doesn't get much attention in the press. It's a war that's forgotten. It's a war that's ongoing. It's a war that its victims were not given the same rights that many victims of war get around the world. So as we keep our eyes on South Sudan, Sudan was its mother, and anything that affects Sudan tends to affect South Sudan. So just to give you a little overview of the situation in South Sudan as of a month ago when I was there. Inflation is at an all-time high. Last year in March, you'd get 800 South Sudanese pounds for $1. At the moment, you get 5,000 South Sudanese pounds for $1. It's incredible inflation that you cannot imagine. They have extreme weather extremities. For a country that only emits 0.01% of global emissions, they have extreme heat waves, and right now, the country is under flooding in some of the most arable land it possesses. Parts of this country have been under flood water for 4 years now, displacing huge amounts of people. The area most affected by the flooding is also the area receiving Sudanese refugees from the conflict and South Sudanese returnees who are refugees in Sudan. So they are coming into areas that you cannot imagine the devastation. I would also want to mention that civil servants had not received a salary from August of last year as of September this year. Civil servants tend to earn between 25 and 30 US dollars. It's money that no one can live on, no matter where you are in the world, no matter the difference in the cost of living in the world. So that's just a bit of the scenario. But what does Friends in Solidarity in partnership with Solidarity with South Sudan do? We run 4 projects, and 2 of them are educational projects: a health training institute for nurses and midwives, and a teachers training college for primary school teachers. One of the ways to elevate conflict is to give people a way to earn a living, but to also contribute to building their country. There was no capacity in South Sudan because when South Sudan was under Sudan, a lot of the development focused on the northern part of the country and not the south, because it was also a religious tension of sorts. Our teachers training college for primary school teachers offering a certificate is only one of 3 in the entire country. Our health training institute that trains nurses and midwives, we attribute 40% of trained healthcare workers have been trained by us. We recruit students from all over the country and also the Nuba Mountains in Sudan, which is a contested area that has been under heavy bombing for almost its entire existence. By bringing these students to live together, we hope to build social cohesion, understanding, tolerance, and acceptance. When they go back to work in their areas, they can say, those people are not our enemies. We might have a history of conflict with them, but we know that tribal conflicts tend to be roused by leaders who want to serve their own selfish interests. So we build local capacity that when our graduates leave us, they can go out and get jobs that can contribute to not only building their own lives, but those of their families and greater communities. We also run an agricultural project. One of the knowledge bases that is lost after years of conflict is even how to grow food and how to prepare it. As people move around the country, you start eating a diet of survival. You start eating food that is provided by humanitarian organizations. So teaching people to grow a wider variety of crops, how to ensure the nutritional health of their children especially is so important to a bright future. We know that nutrition plays a huge part in the mental development of children. So one of the ways we do this is to work with women and local community leaders to teach better farming practices, but not only that, also food preparation. We do a lot in different dioceses in the country through trauma healing workshops and faith formation workshops. I have attended several of these workshops, and it's always amazing at the end of them, the young people say, I think the whole country is traumatized. And then they always say, I wish you could give this workshop to our political leaders, because sometimes the decisions they might be making is because they are traumatized. For people who have been to South Sudan, you know a situation can grow from 0 to 100 in 5 seconds, and you wonder, why is everybody so upset? This is the effect of generations of trauma. There is no person who has grown up in South Sudan who has no memory of trauma, directly or indirectly. There is nobody who has grown up in South Sudan who has not lost a family member to war or conflict. You cannot imagine what that does to a people. Everybody seems to be a threat to you. So we try to work to build these networks of cohesion across cultures, across tribes, across social classes, so that in the future they can identify as South Sudanese first before they identify as tribes, because these are the things that are used to ignite conflict very easily during elections and things like that.
Thank you so much for that. Can you help us understand what people here in this chapel, what people watching online can do to help your efforts to help bring greater peace and justice to the people you serve?
I think the first thing I would say is read and listen to local activists and journalists. The global media can be biased according to what they want to let us know. So we need to listen to people who are on the ground, living out this reality day by day. There's a gentleman called John Ashworth, and Kim assured me they'll send you this information. Sign up for his Google groups. He does these wonderful summaries of Sudan and South Sudan if you want to understand what's going on. But of course, if you can, think of financially supporting grassroots groups who can guarantee that their overheads are low and that the money you give actually goes to help the people. It is difficult to talk about money, but we live in a world that money kind of controls a lot of things. So it is tangible help that is needed in South Sudan. When you meet a police officer who hasn't been paid in 12 months, what does that do? The levels of corruption go through the roof because everybody is seeking to survive. But we also need to sit especially with the question of why the pain of certain demographics in the world does not get enough sympathy as others do. We need to ask why certain wars do not elicit the sympathy and benevolence and generosity of others, why the world reacts differently to conflict, offering full asylum, offering all kinds of measures when a war has broken out in certain parts of the world, but in others, nothing is done. When Sudan broke out in war, many countries closed their borders. We know that the Geneva Convention usually guarantees a right of asylum to anybody undergoing war. They grant them what they say is prima facie status. You can come to the border and say, I have fear of persecution, and you're granted entrance. That did not happen for Sudan. We need to question why. The highest number of conflicts in the world are in Africa. How much do you know about them? We need to educate ourselves, and we need to give equal attention. Just as Jordan said, the dignity inherent in every human being talks about all of us. All of us. And the conflicts in the world are not just between them. There are so many outside interests. And once we are aware of that, we shall know that we have an equal responsibility to everyone around the world.
Thank you so much for that. And we have a resources page connected to this dialogue, and you can go to that resources page and find more information about what Mummy was talking about, John Ashworth and others, and resources for the rest of the dialogue as well. Jordan, let me turn to you now. You're an author, you're an educator, you're a scholar of Muslim-Christian relations, part of Churches for Middle East Peace. Help us understand the situation in Israel-Palestine and how the principles of Catholic social teaching might help shape a response. In what ways can people collaborate around forming this response?
Before talking about some of the big picture numbers and big picture issues, I want to tell a story that I heard several months ago. The Catholic Advisory Council of Churches for Middle East Peace, this is the organization that I'm a part of, we hosted an event where we heard from Catholic Relief Services about some of what they're doing in Gaza and in the West Bank. And the representative who was talking to us told us about 20 women and children who were sheltering together in a single apartment unit. And among the 20 of them, they had one bucket of water to share, which meant that each person got about 8 ounces of water a day. Now, 2 of those women, and I believe they were the women who worked for CRS, were breastfeeding. And if you know anything about breastfeeding, you need to drink a lot of water to provide for your child. And when I heard this story, I mean, it really hit home for me, and it still does. I'm a mother of 2 young kids myself. I have a 2.5-year-old at home, and I have a 7-week 7-week-old baby who I am currently breastfeeding. And I cannot imagine being in the situation of those moms who can't provide for themselves, let alone for their kids. And so when we're talking about these big, large-scale conflicts, I think we have to remember that it's moms and kids and families that are being affected. And so when I look at an issue like Israel-Palestine or these other conflicts we're talking about, at their core, these are pro-life issues, issues of life and death and of living well. And so I think it's really important to foreground that, and once again, to come back to this principle of the inherent dignity of every person. If we zoom out on Israel-Palestine, over the last 13 months, 43,000 at least Palestinians have been killed in Gaza alone. 70% of those people are women and children, mostly civilians. In Israel on October 7th, 1,200 people in Israel were killed by Hamas in that attack. And now in Lebanon, the conflict has expanded. At least 3,000 people have been killed in Lebanon in recent weeks. Again, many civilians. And I'm not even talking about the mass displacement that has occurred, the hunger, the sickness. People are severely wounded and held captive. I mean, it's really overwhelming when you think of the level of violence that people are undergoing. I think it's important for us to keep two principles of Catholic social teaching in mind when we're looking at this situation. The first is the common good. Again, this idea that we don't want to prioritize one group over another in the sense of we're only going to care about the well-being of a certain part of those who are suffering. But then there's this other principle of Catholic social teaching, the preferential option for the poor, vulnerable, and oppressed. This principle, I think, really helps us to drill into some of the systemic and core issues where people are denied rights, people are not enjoying the same privileges as their neighbors. Shortly before the pandemic, I had the opportunity with a number of Georgetown faculty and staff to travel to Israel-Palestine. And we visited the West Bank. We went to cities like Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, Hebron, the city of Abraham and his family. And we saw some of the ways that Palestinians there are living under military occupation and how that affects their lives in terms of being able to get jobs, being able to travel freely, things like that. And so I think we need to, when we're approaching these really difficult issues, we need to keep these principles of Catholic social teaching at the fore.
I want to be sure that we talk about something. How can we be sure that individuals and groups effectively respond to anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, when discussing these issues in the Middle East?
Yeah, this is really important. I think sometimes in Catholic circles and in the US more broadly, we look at Israel-Palestine and we might see it as this Muslim-Jewish conflict or this intractable religious conflict. And I think that's pretty simplistic and harmful for a lot of reasons, and I won't get into all of those right now. But I think when we look at it through that lens, it leads to this collective blaming, which then leads people to have anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish attitudes or lash out in violent ways. It's really important that we reiterate and reaffirm that Muslims, Arabs, Palestinians are not responsible for what Hamas did on October 7th, and that Jews and Israelis are not responsible for what Israel has done in Gaza. I mean, keeping that at the fore is really important, because this collective blaming has itself really violent consequences. A week after the October 7th attack last year outside Chicago, we're coming back to the United States, outside Chicago, a 6-year-old Palestinian-American Muslim boy, Wadea al-Fayyoumi, was killed by his landlord. And this man was Catholic. And he allegedly shouted things at this boy as he was killing him, basically connecting him to Hamas and saying, your people are responsible for what happened on October 7th to this little 6-year-old boy. And these are the consequences of this kind of collective blaming, this linking that I think is really harmful. So we have to be on guard for times when Christians and others draw on some of the anti-Muslim and anti-Jewish stereotypes that unfortunately we don't have a great track record on in our history, especially in Christian Europe and in the United States. At the same time, I also think it's important for us to remember that it's not inherently anti-Muslim to criticize Hamas. It's not, and it's also not inherently anti-Semitic to criticize what Israel has done. So I think we have to use this label of bigotry accurately and make sure that we're not using charges of bigotry to silence what is genuine concern for human rights and human dignity. So I think we have to make sure we're striking that balance.
Thank you. Tatiana, it's good to have you back. Your courageous work with Caritas in Ukraine provides hope and basic necessities for families and individuals living through this horrific crisis. You were part of our public dialogue on Ukraine in March of 2022. Can you tell us what the situation is like now and what we should understand about the suffering of the people in Ukraine?
Yeah, so the situation in Ukraine has not gotten easier. It's gotten more complicated. Yeah. So right now, this year, there were 15 million people in need in Ukraine. 15 million people. Of those, probably about 4 million are displaced, still inside the country. So what we have happening is we have layered needs throughout the country. So in areas that are close to the front line, we continue to have a need for humanitarian response. There's fresh evacuations coming out from the eastern areas where the Russian army is making gains. And these are people who stayed behind in difficult times. They're the ones who found it difficult to move, who are very tied to their homes. It's usually people with a family, with somebody with disabilities or with an elderly parent that they couldn't leave behind. And these are these very vulnerable people who are evacuating now. So there's a need for humanitarian aid along the front line. Further into the country, there's more need for integration, stabilization work, helping people to find their place in a host community, to try to start to rebuild their life in some way, yeah, to try and turn that page and restart again, to find a job, to find a place to live, to start making connections in the local host community. These are people who have lost everything. Yeah, so it's this kind of start from the beginning. At the same time, again, the worst areas, obviously, militarily, are near the frontline areas. These are areas that are even larger cities that are closer to the frontline areas are getting bombarded, bombed much more often. But I have to say that the rest of the country is also under attack, under regular attack. And in particular, the Russians are targeting the energy infrastructure. They've destroyed probably more than half of the capacity of the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. And you could say that there's really no safe place. So just as an example, all throughout September and October in the city where I live, in Kyiv, there were almost nightly drone attacks happening on the city. Yeah, this is nightly drone attacks where you're waking up to air alarms and then having to get up again in the morning and go to work. It was very taxing, and then, explosions, and it's very troubling. And then last Sunday, just this past Sunday, there was a combined attack. It was probably one of the largest attacks we've had on the country since the war started. There was over 200 missiles, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drone attacks that attacked all areas of the country. Yeah. So it's very intense. There was areas where that they were able to reach their target. So again, they're attacking this energy infrastructure, and winter is coming. Yeah, this affects light, it affects heat, it affects water access, all these things. And then today only, just today, there was an attack in one of the border towns. There was a ballistic missile that hit in Sumy, hit a residential area, and also in Odessa. And there's between over 10 people who have already been killed just today, from the attacks that happened. So I'm saying all this to kind of explain that the war is still ongoing. And I would echo what my colleagues were saying, that very often when the attention of the media is lost in a particular region, it doesn't mean that that region isn't continuing to suffer and that the war is still ongoing. And that's what we're having in Ukraine. And then to kind of put all of that kind of an overarching problem that we're seeing, which my colleagues also mentioned, is the question of trauma. At this point, every single person in the country has been affected in some way. Yeah, someone has been killed, or they've been around bombings, or there's every single person has been affected, and that's why one of the growing needs is this healing of the wounds of war, and that's for everybody. Yeah, from the beginning to end. It's but in a particular way, it's for families who have lost their loved ones. Yeah, so who are grieving. It's mothers, it's fathers, it's wives, it's children, and there's a lot of that seems to be a growing problem. In addition to all these other humanitarian needs, there's this growing need for grief work, helping people to find a sense in what's happening, and again to walk through that. that space, feeling the solidarity and feeling that there's someone walking along with them.
Thank you. Radesh, I'm going to ask you one more question, Tatiana, and then we're going to get to questions from our audience. But let me ask you, in the midst of all of this suffering, how does your faith sustain you? How does it challenge you? Where do you find hope? How do the principles of Catholic social teaching sort of work in your mind, in your life, in this situation? And what's your message to us here?
I would say the thing that holds me the most, it's reading the Psalms, because the Psalms are a very therapeutic place in Scripture where emotions get expressed, where it's this intimate relationship with God that has this beautiful dialogue that's happening. So the Psalms and Sunday liturgy. Honestly, I don't have a lot of time, but I always make it to Sunday liturgy. And every single time it resets me. I walk out and I feel somehow that I've been edified, I've been built up again, given new strength. It's I've always loved the liturgy, but I've never experienced it quite in this way. It's been a very powerful experience for me. And I mean, in terms of Catholic social teaching, it's really, the important thing is to look, judge, and act. And that action is so important, to take what you're seeing when you're seeing something wrong, to be able to stay human is to be able to act and help others, to go out of yourself. And it doesn't, sometimes it's in humanitarian aid, sometimes it can just be being kind to the person who's next to you who might be suffering that day, or it could be, with a staff member, or offering some kind of staff care, or so I think that holding on to community, holding on to a sense of solidarity, that sense of relationality, which what makes us human, that's the thing that I think that's the main message, and to not lose hope, because despite what you're going through, despite what's happening all around you, God is there. God, your faith, and God is above you, and it's such a powerful reminder. And then when you add onto that the community and solidarity, I mean, I can't even begin to explain what it felt like in the beginning when the full-scale invasion started, that sense of solidarity that we had from all around the world. I mean, that gave us strength. I mean, it was so powerful, and I think that then it's something that we're all doing together, yeah? Because all that aid that comes, that we've been talking about, different places you can donate, that aid and that relationality that I was talking about, it starts, from the donor, from the person who's offering assistance. And it's that, like, bringing that fullness, giving yourself integrity, yeah? When you see something that you want to make right, like the Good Samaritan that my colleague mentioned, yeah? That taking a step and then having that find its mark, and that chain of relationships that makes humanitarian aid possible is really...
I love that. And I think that's a great way, as we move into questions from the audience, to really focus on what I think of as, you've just really highlighted some really core principles of Catholic social teaching, right? Solidarity with the other, relationality among all of us, and especially keeping a human face on all of these conflicts, instead of talking about them in the abstract, trying to remember the human beings and the faces that are at the center of all of the violence and conflict that we're talking about here. So now we're going to go to questions from our audience. And I love, one thing I love about these Dahlgren Dialogues is that we really just have a wonderful tradition here with the Office of Mission and Ministry, and that this takes place in this context of prayer, in this wonderful sacred space, which is so beautiful. And another tradition we have is that we make sure that we preference questions from students first, and then after that, we'll go to questions from others. And we ask you to keep your questions concise, just so that we can get to as many as possible. So please tell us who you are, tell us who your question is for, and just raise your hand. Our colleagues are on either aisle and are looking forward to asking your questions. Yeah, right in front. Anna's coming over with a microphone. Please stand up with your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for all of your insight today. I'm Yulina. I'm a junior at Georgetown in the School of Foreign Service, majoring in international economics and math. And I'm taking a theology course right now called Black Churches and Ecumenism. So work being done to achieve Christian unity. And one big takeaway I've had from the course was a lot of the history of trying to achieve Christian unity had been focused on overcoming doctrinal differences, but once Black churches entered the dialogue, there was a much bigger shift on how can we honor the dignity of every single person, and it kind of paved the path for ecumenism to also include a lot of social work. And I was wondering, it was really awesome to hear all the Catholic insights about how to respond to crises, and do you think there's a role for broader ecumenical dialogue?
Excellent, wonderful. Who would like to take that? Who can we start out with here on ecumenical dialogue and the role here?
Sudan.
Yeah, would you like to help us? Thank you.
Sure. And just to mention, last year there was a ecumenical pilgrimage for peace to South Sudan. And I was blessed enough to be there when Pope Francis and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the moderator of the Church of Scotland all came to South Sudan. And Christians from all these faith traditions and others came to Juba to experience this. And first of all, for me, it was the desire for peace that was evident. Many of these pilgrims walked to Juba, taking 10 days, 2 weeks to get to Juba, sleeping on the streets for the 4 days that this event took place. There's a lot of work, and I think when there's a crisis, a lot of our differences seem to melt away. And we come back, first of all, to ensuring that basic human needs are met. The Catholic Church, of course, is very blessed because of its size and its long tradition of Catholic social teaching to have the infrastructure to do social work. So they come in providing social services like education and healthcare and social work. Wherever you go in the developing world, this is what the Catholic Church is known for. But other traditions are also part of that history. And so I liked when you said that we used to focus on doctrinal differences, but every major religion in the world talks about treating your neighbor as yourself. It's there in different, they use different language, but it says the same thing. And I think there's a recognition of that we are all about ensuring the dignity of the human person, that their needs are met, that they know that they are loved, and that they're created in the image of God. Focusing on that and providing for all that ensures that is what is the basis for ecumenism in many parts of the developing world. Yes.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for that great question. I appreciate it. Others? Okay.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Miriam. I'm also a junior studying international economics in the School of Foreign Service. And I wanted to ask about the role of the hierarchical nature of the Catholic Church. And I know that when Pope Francis usually shares a message or a call, such as Laudato Si, about the need for action on climate change, it's usually something that then creates a ripple effect in the rest of the Catholic world. And I wanted to ask, I know that Pope Francis recently called for an investigation into potential genocide in Gaza. And so I wanted to ask about how do Catholic communities respond to calls such as Pope Francis' recent one? And in general, what is the infrastructure there to respond immediately in humanitarian crises?
Thank you. David, maybe I'll come to you on this, and I want to make sure we put that in context too, right? Pope Francis this weekend also, he met with hostages as well. He's called for an investigation here. How does that ripple out through the Catholic structures and various organizations?
Well, the Pope's initiatives on a number of these issues have been being promulgated in various groups around the world. And the Pope is a major leader of a large multinational community. And if we keep in mind that the Catholic community is genuinely transnational and multinational, that opens the door for thinking about ways that this community could make a contribution to peace between nations, because very often these conflicts are about divisions between people on one side of a border and the other side of a border. And if you have a community that reaches across the border and has a leader that, like Pope Francis, who is clearly a transnational leader, this can make a huge difference. And so I think one of the reasons why the church can be such an important player in promoting international peace and justice is precisely the fact that it relativizes the borders between nations. And that means that we can take one another seriously across those borders. So that at least that's one aspect of the response to your question. There's a lot more that could be said about that, but that's one aspect.
Thank you, and thanks, Miriam, for that great question. I think we have time for one more question. I'm going to go over a little bit just because we haven't had, we had a very rich discussion here tonight.
Well, thank you very much for the panel tonight. My name is Oscar Rios. I'm a second-year grad student over at GW, and I study Latin America Studies. I guess my question would be, I guess, some spiritual advice from Father, or from practical advice from the rest of the panel. In many ways, I think we've lost trust in the social fabric. Yes, my question would be, how do we prevent ourselves from becoming jaded to the sufferings of those all across our world, not just in Latin America, but in the Middle East, in the Ukraine, and as we near 1,000 days since the most recent, reemergence of conflict in the Ukraine, how do we, prevent ourselves from becoming jaded and turning our eyes away from the injustices we see every day in the world? Thank you very much.
That is such a beautiful question, and I wonder if we might use that as part of our wrap-up question for each one of you. So how do we resist? So, and one thing we always ask at the end is, what's one step we can take here in response to what we've heard here tonight? And so Mumbi, maybe I'll start with you, and I want to start with that sort of, I hope you can respond to that beautiful question. How do we, as part of your answer, how do we not become jaded? How do we not become cynical? What can we do in response here?
The first thing is something my sisters have always told me, is to think global and act local, yes? There's always something we can do, and I think sometimes the problem we have is really when you look at everything happening in the world, you get overwhelmed. And sometimes you're kind of thinking, what would this little me really do to change the world? But around us, there's need everywhere. If we could only look, there's need everywhere. So even as we educate ourselves and think of signing a petition or being part of a bigger movement out there or donating something, what is happening in your local community that you could do something about? Even though my work focuses on South Sudan, my entire existence cannot be about South Sudan because I'm also a resident of the United States, and in particular in Silver Spring. And all these things, because we are so interconnected in the world, have a ripple effect. And a wonderful Jesuit, Teilhard, talked about this energy that we put out, quantum physics, that everything we have has a ripple effect. So what are we doing locally? What are we doing nationally? What are we doing internationally? And sometimes the choices are based on our circumstances at that time, but not acting, for me, is the first thing that leads to kind of becoming jaded, because we are consuming and there is no outlet. So as we consume information about the conflict, what is one action item that you can do? And that whole saying that wise people said, it is more blessed to give than to receive, plays so true that the minute you do one thing, you find yourself unable to stop. You do it also for your own sanity and for your own dignity as a human being, that you will never say, it happened and I did nothing. I will stop there.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you. David, how can we prevent, what can we do in response to what we've heard?
One of the things that I think is useful is to keep in mind that there have been moments of real success in this area, that it's not all bad. And I think back to, for example, when Southern Sudan, before it became an independent country, was struggling with oppression coming from Khartoum in the north and trying to seek some kind of, and it was a civil war that had been going on within Sudan for decades, and it was a very serious civil war. George W. Bush, who was the president of the United States at the time, this is 20 plus years ago, had a lot of pressure put on him, both from the evangelical community of the United States, from the Catholic community of the United States, a lot of pressure put on George W. Bush. And he took action. He put pressure on both the government of Khartoum, the people in southern Sudan, and they worked out an agreement that eventually led to the independence of the country of South Sudan. And so, unfortunately, South Sudan has fallen into conflict since that day, but at least there was a resolution of the conflict of a civil war that had been going on for a long time, partly because there was a lot of grassroots pressure on George W. Bush. And that's a success, and I think we can see that as something relevant today.
Thank you. Jordan, how about yourself? What can we do, and how can we not become jaded and cynical in response to the violence that we're seeing?
I think it's important that we continue to pay attention to all of these conflicts and the suffering. I think we can't turn away despite how difficult it is. I mean, that might mean that sometimes we do have to take a step back and take some time to process and to take care of ourselves. We have to keep paying attention. I think we also can we're really obligated to reach out to our elected officials who, in the case of the Israel-Palestine situation, do have some leverage to change things and alleviate much of the suffering. We are in the final days of having our second Catholic president, so I think we need to appeal to our Catholic president as Catholics to live out some of these values of Catholic social teaching. You asked what can give us hope and keep us from being jaded. There's a passage from the Quran that I've been thinking about lately, which is God is with the patient, God is with the steadfast. And so we need to hold on to that patience and that steadfastness and be assured that God is with us and with those who are suffering.
Thank you. Tatiana, we'll end with you. What can we do in response to what we've heard tonight? How can we resist this becoming jaded, becoming cynical?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one word that wraps up what everyone said is engage. Yeah. And it was this important moment that Sister mentioned about when you see something, when you take something in, you need to respond so that you can later say, I didn't just sit and watch, yeah, that I did something. And everyone can do something. You can pray, you can educate yourself, you can listen, you can offer solidarity, you can support organizations that are working on the ground. As Sister said, grassroots organizations that are local, that are really working to make a difference on the ground with people and restoring that hope, that peace, and that love that is so needed in this world. And you can be a part of that by participating. But all the three, I mean, prayer, essential. I think that we all of us who have been in conflict situations can testify that there comes a moment where you stand and you wonder, how am I still functioning? And I think part of it is the fact that people were praying. And so this power of prayer, this solidarity of educating yourself, of listening, of accompanying, of being with, and then engaging with people who are on the ground and being part of that chain of assistance. So.
Thank you so much. And that's a wonderful way to end what we're talking about here tonight. We started with prayer. We're about to end with a hymn in just a minute. Before we get to that, let me just preview an upcoming dialogue that we have because it's going to be terrific. It's on December 10th, 7 p.m. on a Tuesday, and we're going to continue our analysis of the election with a live-streamed and in-person public dialogue in Gaston Hall, exploring how key principles of Catholic social teaching can offer an affirmative path forward in our challenged church and in our polarized nation. And we're going to have David Brooks from the New York Times, Kerry Robinson, the president of Catholic Charities USA, Vince Rougeau, who is the president of Holy Cross, and Sister Teresa Maya from the Catholic Health Association. So please visit our website for more information about that. Our colleagues here in the Office of Mission and Ministry are celebrating Jesuit Heritage Month along with all of us here at Georgetown. And so we hope you can attend other special events and programming for the rest of November. And please visit Mission and Ministry at georgetown.edu for more information. You can see follow-up resources, as I mentioned, at our website, the Initiative on Catholic Social Thought and Public Life, and this video will be posted there soon as well. And I want to thank our colleagues here tonight. Of course, I want to thank Father Mark Bosco, Father Andy Downing, Ryan Craig, Jim Wickman, and Russell Wiseman of Mission and Ministry for their help in bringing this conversation here together. I'd like to thank Shadi McMalou for his beautiful opening prayer. Thank you so much, Shadi. And as always, I want to thank John, Kimberly, Anna, and Christian for their help in organizing this gathering, and to all of you here for joining us, all of you online for joining us as well. If you're here with us in Georgetown, please join us afterwards at Healy Foyer, right out there for a reception following the conversation. And in a moment, please join us in singing a hymn led by our colleagues in the Office of Mission and Ministry, Lord, Make Us Servants of Your Peace, and it's available in your programs. But first, please join me in thanking Jordan, Father David, Sister Mumbi, and Tatiana for being a part of this dialogue. Thank you. Thank you.
I invite you to please stand.